Well, welcome. This is another video I thought I would do on another textbook I found, Biblical Aramaic. This particular book I found in electronic format, and I normally try to find these materials that way so that I can put them in these videos. I have done books before where I've actually cut the pages and scanned them in, but that's a whole lot of work. So I thought, why not just make a video on this one since I did come across it? And you could find this book at Amazon. Um, and I'm not really sure what to expect. I mean, I've just started Biblical Aramaic. I did sort of go through the beginning parts of it, and it seems like it's broken down into smaller chunks compared to that other Biblical Aramaic book that I had. What I'm going to do is we're just going to start going through this and see what we can discover. And if you have any comments or anything, put them down in the comment section. Okay, so these are the preface stuff. Here's all the contents. Looks like it has some exercises in it. All right, that's pretty. Looks like it gets pretty in depth. Quite a bit of the stuff. Okay, so about this book, let me see if I can make the text a little bigger. Maybe. How about that? That might work. Okay, so like most, if not all, Aramaic instructors, I am deeply indebted to Franz Rosenthal's seminal Grammar of Biblical Aramaic, arguably the most comprehensive reference grammar available. At the same time, I found myself again, probably like most of my colleagues, developing my own charts, summaries, and exercises in order to introduce students to Biblical Aramaic, rather than just review the grammar for them. In accordance with the basic structure of a reference grammar, this book's purpose is to acquaint students with the writing system, phonology, morphology, and syntax of the pertinent text in the books of Daniel and Ezra. It is a book primarily for the classroom and only secondarily for the specialist and Semitic linguists. I guess that's good for us, because, you know, I don't claim to be a Semitic linguist. I'm just a student. As such, it also seeks to account for the fact that most students who come to Biblical Aramaic have had prior exposure to Biblical Hebrew. Well, I have. I've taught quite a bit of it. While this instruction does not presuppose any particular level of expertise in Hebrew, it gives students the opportunity to relate what they know about the Hebrew to the study of Aramaic. For this purpose, side glances at Biblical Aramaic's big brother complement the grammar discussion throughout the book. Insomuch as this introduction is a book for the classroom, it is also a book from the classroom. The decisions about what to unfold in detail and what to mention in passing were profoundly influenced by what students found to be challenging aspects of religion. Apart from the particularities of the Aramaic noun and verbs, this led me to place special emphasis on syntactical issues. Biblical Aramaic is both a uniquely idiomatic and highly formulaic language, which means that even more than in Hebrew, the ability to parse forms is only the first step toward understanding the meaning of sentences and entire text. The reader should note that I refer throughout to the Masoretic versification, which in the book of Daniel differs from the English versions in the following places. Okay, so they give this list here. Unless otherwise noted, the translations of all texts are my own. Finally, a word of thanks. I'm grateful to Westminster John Knox Press for including a technical book like this in their program. My hopes that this will help to cultivate an awareness in the church that thorough linguistic training is not a luxury reserved for the academic guild, but rather an indispensable part of the training of those who seek to become interpreters of Scripture. Wow, I like that statement, because that's true. If you're going to claim to know anything about the Bible, then you better spend some time studying the original language. All right. I don't want to say too much on that, but I got to tell you, there's how many teachers out there that are in the Messianic Hebrew roots movement can't even read a line of Hebrew. I mean, it's everywhere, and some of them, yeah, a lot of them do have some proficiency. That's good, but but a lot of them don't, and there's a lot of people that follow them and they make claims, things particularly with reference to Aramaic or Hebrew kinds of things, with reference to the name or so on, that they don't have the skill sets to make those kinds of claims. Okay, so here's some abbreviations. They're going to give us absolute state, adjective, BA, biblical Aramaic, biblical Hebrew, C common, century, CF, compare, construct state, demonstrative, DET, determinate state, F feminine, hop ale, conjugation, hip pa'al, conjugation, hit pa'al, conjugation, hop all, conjugation, imperfect, imperative, infinitive, literally masculine, mater lectionis. What this is I'll talk a little bit about that, but that literally in Latin, that means mother of reading. And a lot of times, like in Hebrew, the noon or the yod could be such in that case. Well, mostly the noon, I think. All right, noon, energicum, that's Latin probably too. Negation, negative, New Revised Standard Version. I guess that's the Bible of choice they're using. Pa'al, conjugation, pe'al, conjugation, perfect, plural, preposition, pronoun, particle, regular. Revised Standard Version, singular suffix. Okay, so these are all. So what is Biblical Aramaic? The term Biblical Aramaic points to the fact that in addition to Biblical Hebrew, the Old Testament Hebrew Bible hosts one other Semitic language. Parts of the books of Daniel, Daniel 2:4 to 7:28. I'll make sure I get that right this time. It's the last video I did. I made a mistake on that, but I corrected it. And Ezra 4:8, 6:18, 7:12, 26, as well as one verse from the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah 10:11. And two words in Genesis 31:47 were written in Aramaic. The pertinent passages in Daniel, Ezra seem to have been consciously inserted into literary contexts that otherwise used Hebrew. Okay. It gives Daniel 2:4 and Ezra 4:7. The reason for the change of language is apparent in Ezra. These texts include correspondence between Jewish officials and the Persian court. Although exegetes dispute if or to what extent these are authentic documents, it is clear that at the time of the Persian Empire, don't you just love these exegetes out there who dispute whether this is real? Oh, anyway, don't get me started. It is clear at the time of the Persian Empire, any correspondence between a province and a royal court, whether authentic or imaginary, had to be in Aramaic, the lingua franca. It is the literary genre, I think, itself that calls for Aramaic. However, in this book of Daniel, there is no obvious reason why the language changes from Hebrew to Aramaic and then returns to Hebrew in chapter 8. According to one hypothesis, the text of Daniel, as we have it in the Hebrew Bible, is an unfinished translation from Aramaic into Hebrew. This view is based on the assumption that by the time the book was composed in the first half of the 2nd century BCE, before Common Era, we could just say before Christ or before Messiah, Hebrew had already been recognized as the language of the canonical traditions, whereas Aramaic had become the dominant spoken written language. But such an explanation may not be required. Most likely the Daniel tradition, which as the Greek transmission shows, extended well beyond the biblical material, comprised texts in both Hebrew and Aramaic that were then included in the biblical book of Daniel. On linguistic grounds, biblical Aramaic is a bit of an awkward category. Although dating and locating the Ezra and Daniel text is tricky, most exegetes agree that there may be more than 2 centuries between Ezra and most of Daniel, that not only time but also space separates them. Ezra's frame of reference is the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, while Daniel's world is that of the Babylonian diaspora. That would refer to the 70 years, remember, that the Jews were carried away into Babylon. Diaspora means that they were carried away. Despite these striking differences in context, the language used in both traditions is relatively similar because of their genre as folk tales. The Daniel narratives exhibit an Aramaic that is more idiomatic than Ezra's, but there are hardly any differences in morphology and syntax. This can be explained by the fact that the language of both Ezra and Daniel is part of what Semitists call imperial or official. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, now I do have an imperial book that I've been thinking about starting. That would be kind of neat. Aramaic. By the late Assyrian and Babylonian periods, Aramaic, rather than cuneiform, was being used in the official communication between Mesopotamia and Syria, Palestine. In the Persian period, Aramaic finally advanced to the state of the lingua franca, the common language of the Achaemenid Empire. If it was ever true, I think it has to do with the empire surrounding around Syria and so on. If it was ever true in early antiquity that the earth had the same language or the same words as Genesis 11:1 depicts it, then this was Imperial Aramaic. Wow! So they think that the primal Genesis language is Imperial Aramaic. There is some books that I've recommended to people that suggest that it was Hebrew, or at least a purer form of Hebrew, but I mean, they're very, very close, these languages. This does not mean that there was only one spoken language at that time. Well, he's doubting that, but in the Bible, it actually says they all had the same language. They all spoke one tongue. It was probably a pure form of Hebrew. Anyway, people certainly continued to use their native languages and local dialects. However, the remarkable degree of coherence of the texts that have come to us from this period could be attributed to the use of Aramaic as the standard written language, not unlike medieval Latin or even today's Common English. An introduction to biblical Aramaic, therefore, provides access not only to the pertinent texts in Ezra and Daniel, but also to the literary remnants of the Persian period and beyond. Even the Aramaic text from Qumran, that would have to do with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so there was some Aramaic text in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Interesting. Mostly from the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE or before Messiah, despite their particularities, are still indebted to Imperial Aramaic as their predecessor. So that means that they were probably in this regular block script that Hebrew is, but they may have had some previous impacts from this other Imperial script. That Imperial script looks almost like like cursive in a way. It's interesting. Despite their peculiarities, are still indebted to Imperial Aramaic as their predecessor. It is only toward the end of the 1st millennium BCE and in the following centuries that two grammatically distinct types of Aramaic emerge: an Eastern type in Mesopotamia and a Western type in Syria, Palestine. Okay, now in that other book that I did, it gave you the chart, so you can see that. I think that's in lesson 1, if you go to our page. Okay, carrying on from the Phoenician to the Aramaic writing system. Okay, so the inventors of Northwest Semitic writing system were the Phoenicians, who had lived in the northern coastal area of Syria, Palestine, long before Arameans and Canaanites, among them especially Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, and eventually Israelites and Judeans settled in the same area, compared especially with the more sophisticated cuneiform style of Mesopotamia. The Phoenician system represents a rather handy and easy to learn alphabet. It consists of 22 signs. Wow, just like Hebrew has 22 consonants, the same as in the Hebrew alphabet. See comparison table on page 4. This writing system had its merits. It was easier to learn and to use than cuneiform, which requires a much greater level of scribal sophistication and expertise. However, since it included only consonants, the simplicity of the Phoenician script involved a significant level of ambiguity regarding the vocalization and meaning of words. Wow, well, that's the trouble we have today, where we really need to rely on the work of the Masoretes, as the Jews have, to get the sounds out of the consonants, because Hebrew was a dead language for a while. Anyway, a simple form like, looks like they've got a pei, aleph, lamed, can have a variety of grammatical a pei, ayin, lamed, rather, looks like. It's kind of small script, I notice. Functions and meanings. Infinitive, all imperial forms, except feminine plural, third masculine or feminine singular perfect, third plural perfect, singular participle, all forms, plural participle, constant maybe. Although these possibilities are never equally likely in a given literary context, the writing of consonants alone requires the reader to complete the phonetic structure of a word. This is certainly not a specific problem of Northwest Semitic languages, since no writing system, except perhaps the International Phonetic Alphabet, could ever represent the entire phonemic inventory of a given language. However, it seems that the lack of any vowel signs was perceived as a problem, at least by those who adopted the Phoenician writing system. Well, yeah, if you have not been taught this from a child about what letters go with how, and in other words, if you don't have the vowel pointings, then you have to rely on the sounds that were passed on to you by your people. But if the people lost that, then you'd have to come up with a way of preserving the sound system. And because you could have 3 letters, and you could have all different kinds of words come out of those three consonants. So this is a problem they had to address in time. Okay, so we have the original form. Look at that. That looks like Paleo-Hebrew of sorts. And then we have the square script. I wonder if I could get that just for this. No, I can't get that to look any bigger unless I can. There we go. Okay, so maybe I could do a little bit there. All right, so the original form, look at that. Here is Aleph, and then they've got these Bet, Nun, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het. I apologize, it's a little bit blurry, but I think most of it is shown for you. Tet, Yod, we've got Chaf, Chaf Sofit, the final Chaf, Lamed, Mem, Mem Sofit, Nun, Nun Sofit, and see, these are all, look at that. Samic, Ayin, oh, look at that plain O, that's just Ayin in Paleo, or Phoenician kind of Paleo. I call it Paleo, but it's Fe, Sofit, Fe, we've got Sadiq, look at that. Look at the similarities of some of these. Kof, there's Reish, there's Sheen or Seen, there's Tav, and it's done with an X. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so the script. Significant changes occurred, however, when the Arameans took it over to the needs of their own language. The most significant novelty that the Arameans introduced was vowel signs, also called mothers of reading. That's what that means. Matres lectionis in Latin means mothers of reading. Reading aids. They used some of the signs. Look at that. We've got, looks like Vav, Yod, Hey, Aleph to indicate vowels. Isn't that something? This was perhaps not a deliberate invention, but resulted from the coming together of Phoenician script and Aramaic phonetics. For example, the Arameans pronounced a Phoenician personal name, Panamo, whereas the Phoenicians themselves pronounce it Panamua. To the Arameans, in the Vav in the was not a consonant, but a symbol expressing the final oo sound. So it was a certain extent by coincidence that the Arameans induced vowel signs to the Phoenician script. So the Arameans, basically what they did is they took some of these Hebrew consonant letters and they assigned vowel sounds to them, sounds like. Let's see, originally these vowel signs were used only for long vowels at the end of the words. At a later stage, however, they were increasingly used in the cores of words and for short vowels, as the Qumran text especially show. So we've got the treasures of wisdom there. The Vav in Aleph, Vav, Zadik, Resh, Tet indicate a long, and in this case, contracted vowel. Asar, Osar. In Hey, Nun, Chaf, Mem, Tav, Aleph, however, the vowel is called Hokmata. Interesting. And would not have been written in old, ancient, early Aramaic text. Okay, this is interesting. The development of specific phonemes in Aramaic and Hebrew. Vowel signs are a genuine feature of Aramaic script. They are familiar to students who know Hebrew before they come to Aramaic. Historically, however, it was the other way around. When the Palestinian tribes settled down, they took over the writing system from their immediate neighbors, the Arameans. Interesting. So it passed from Arameans to Palestinian tribes, or Philistines, maybe? A problem for the Arameans that the Phoenician alphabet did not match entirely the phonemic inventory of their language. In other words, they had some sounds they didn't have letters to match with. In particular, the Arameans had more consonants than the Phoenicians. which meant that some signs had to be used for more than one consonantal value. The following chart indicates these cases were, for reasons to be explained below, a consonant expressed 2 or 3 different phonemes. Okay, so Old Aramaic, this is the regular script here, Aleph, Bet. And there is, it's like a, interesting. Okay, so, so that, we got, this is Gamel, that's a little bit blurry. Dalet, D, Hey, H, Vav, oh, look at that. There's that W sound, an ancient. Yeah, because we know even in Hebrew, the more ancient sound of Vav was the W sound. Zayin, Z, D. There's Het. They got 2 different variations on that. More of a H sound and a Ch sound. Tet. Okay, got the T sound. All right. Let me see if I can get this back down. Okay, Yod, Y, okay, Kaf, K, Lamed, L, Mem, L, M, Mem is just an M sound, Noon, N sound, okay. Okay, Semitic, we got the S sound, Ayin, interesting. I don't know if this is, we got Fe. Oh, look at that, the Fe just stayed as Pei. A P sound, a hardening. Sadiq, it had a couple of them here. You got the TS sound and you got just the T sound. Kof, you got the Q sound, but also had a G sound. Wow. Resh, R, Sheen, you got the Sheen or Seen, but also it doubled as a T sound. That's interesting. Tav, it stayed T. Okay. How does one know about multiple consonantal values if there's only one sign? This becomes clear if one compares Old Aramaic with another Semitic language, such as the Biblical Hebrew. A few help rules help us to understand why certain words are spelled differently in Hebrew than in Aramaic, although they are the same words. Okay, besides the soft sibilants, z, as in English zoo, also represent the interdental d, as in th in those. It is called interdental because it has a sibilant S-like and a dental DT-like component. For example, the masculine singular demonstrative pronoun this one was originally spelled, looks like DI, yeah. Okay, in later Aramaic, including Biblical Aramaic, the same word was spelled differently, namely, you've got the Dalet Yod. This suggests that the pronunciation had changed to Dalet Yod. The interdental had become purely dental. Ancient Hebrew had the same interdental, but there it turned into a sibilant. The word looks like Zayin Hey was still written with a Zayin, but pronounced Z-A-E. The practical rule for students who are already familiar with Hebrew is that in some cases where ancient Northwest Semitic had an interdental, Biblical Aramaic shows a Dalet, while Biblical Hebrew has a Zayin. I think in the other book, we kind of saw that too. Okay, ancient Semitic. Okay, so Biblical Aramaic, we've got a D, Dalet. Biblical Hebrew, we've got the Z sound. So it's like they're interchangeable between the languages. Okay, this includes the following words. Okay, so we've got Biblical Hebrew, we've got Zahav, but in Biblical Aramaic, we've got Dahav. Remember, I think we did that word in the other one too. Altar has Mishbeach. Mizbeach. I think I need to make that bigger. Mizbeach. And then altar in Biblical Aramaic is Midbach. Looks like Midbach. There's no arm is, so Roa, and arm is Dara. In other words, the Z changes to a D sound. And I wish I could get this sharper for you guys, but I'm able to see them at least well enough. Now, if you get the book from Amazon, these will be very sharp. You'll be able to see them. Zakach, looks like Zakach, to sacrifice. Devach, to sacrifice. Devah, I don't know if that might be a hey there. Okay, so the same principle of interdental splitting up into a dental component Aramaic and a sibilant component Hebrew applies to TS. A consonant has no equivalent in English. One would have to pronounce TS and TH at the same time. In Aramaic, this interdental eventually became an emphatic T, and non-existent in English, written tet. In Hebrew, it became an emphatic S, as in Setzifly, and written with a Zadik. So it's like TS sound. Ancient Semitic got Biblical Aramaic T and this tet, Biblical Hebrew S and Zadik examples. Okay, so here's Zur, mountain in Biblical Hebrew. Tur becomes mountain. So this Zadik changes to a tet. So TS sound becomes just t. And summer, we have, wish I could see that better. Karitz maybe became karit. So you see the Zadik, Sofit becomes a tet. Third case of interdentals becoming dentals and sibilants is T, such as the TH in thing or therapy. In Aramaic, this developed into a simple T written tav, and Hebrew into a, looks like S sound, as in ship, written sheen. Ancient Semitic, so Biblical Hebrew got this sheen S sound and becomes a T. So it's kind of like, have you ever heard the differences? Certain Jews, they pronounce it Shabbat, and some will say Shabbos, depending on which part of Europe they're from. It's either Shabbos or Shabbat. That's kind of a similar thing here, I think. Okay, 3, we've got Shalosh in Biblical Hebrew. Talash, no, Talah looks like in Biblical Aramaic. Maybe I can get this a little bigger. Shuv in Biblical Hebrew is to return to. Again, we've got Tuv in Biblical Aramaic. So that S sound becomes a T sound. To sit, settle down. Yashav becomes Yatav. So look at that. Okay, Kof. In the final case where Aramaic and Hebrew develop differently, consonantal values from the same ancient Northwest Semitic phoneme is an emphatic laryngeal, whose original pronunciation, again, is uncertain. The most important word that includes this sound is land. In Old Aramaic written, in Hebrew, it's eretz, as in Jeremiah 10:11. But they've got erek. Students of Hebrew know this word. There it is, eretz. The original sound seems to have had an emphatic sibilant component that in Hebrew merged with zadik, whereas in later Biblical Aramaic, it merged with ayin and became ara, ara for land. Ancient Semitic. Okay, so this is an example here. Biblical Hebrew got this zadik became ayin. So this ts became just plain silent. Okay, so there it is, eretz in Hebrew for land, and here's ara. That's what it is in Aramaic. Wool looks like zemed. I think that's a dalet. And this became emed. Let me get that bigger, just double check. Yeah, that's a dalet. Okay. All right, eventually the alphabet of Imperial Aramaic comprised 22 signs that stood for 23 consonants. Only sheen still express 2 consonantal values. So Imperial Aramaic, they split, well, I guess in how they split it in Hebrew is they put that dagesh lean in there, that dot. Or actually, it's a superlinear dot. It's not dagesh lean. It's a superlinear dot. That's on one of the tines. That's how they split the two. But I guess what they did in Imperial Aramaic is they literally made a separate consonant that you count. Whereas in Hebrew, you're not counting. It gets considered a twin consonant. Sheen and seen are considered twin. But in Imperial Aramaic, apparently, they literally separated them so that you got 23 consonants instead of 22, as is normally seen. That's an interesting thing. Okay, so here's Biblical Aramaic. Okay, this is Biblical. Remember, this is not Imperial. Okay, so Masoretic vowel signs. When biblical Aramaic texts represent the constant of Imperial Aramaic, vowel signs were added to these texts at a much later stage by the Tiberian Masoretes, 8th century to 10th century Common Era, or after Messiah. As with biblical Hebrew, more than a millennium lies between the consonants and the addition of vowel signs. So for a long time, the Jewish people did retain the sound system, but it began to drop off because as they were in the dispersion, they were dispersed all over the Europe and whatnot, all over the world. They began to pick up, in order to get by, they had to pick up the language of the nations around them. The rabbis were becoming concerned because Hebrew was getting lost. And so the Masoretes got together and they created this sound preservation system, essentially. The Masoretes applied a vocalized system that, in their view, represented the Aramaic vowels of ancient text. However, since the Masoretes themselves spoke Aramaic, there is a reason to assume that, to a large extent, the Masoretes' vocalization of biblical Aramaic reflects the Aramaic of their own time. The Masoretes distinguish between stops and spirants for the following 6 consonants. We've got, looks like fe or pay. We've got kaf or Chaf. We got Dalet, Gamel, and it looks like Vav. And Tav, the so-called Beged Kafet consonants. Okay, and the stop pronouncing, let's see, T, P, K, D, G, B, Beged, is indicated by a Dagesh lean. Remember I mentioned that? That little dot there is a Dagesh lean, and it's like considered a reduced Dagesh. Basically what it does is it hardens or it softens the letter in Hebrew. And so they added those two. It applies when no vowel precedent precedes the consonant. So here is, looks like barach, blessed, beginning of a word. So we have malka, the king, malka, no vowel before kaf. If a vowel stands before one of these consonants, they are spirantized and written without a dagesh. So, for example, av for father and looks like aved, making. That's right. Vowels precede both the bet and the dalet for the purpose of reading. It is not crucial to distinguish. Let me get this back down.